Hello, welcome to Sex Trafficking in India Country, Washington State. My name is Deborah K. Adams, and I am the program coordinator for WomenSpirit Coalition. I will be your presenter today, and I will give you a little background into why I think I should be able to present this information to you. So, I have over 20 years' experience in working in the field of anti-violence against women. That includes specifically domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, dating violence, and sex trafficking. I have worked with nonprofits and I have presented at a national level conference. I also work with survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking specifically as well. So I'm happy to bring some information to you. We are trying to begin this conversation. WomenSpirit Coalition provides support and technical assistance to Washington State tribes as they develop and maintain their own response in their own reservation lands, in their communities for their peoples. And we are introducing the topic of sex trafficking. So, in this beginning conversation, I think it's important to go over some background information. What is sex trafficking and why are we talking about sex trafficking in the United States? Why are we talking about it in Indian country? And these are important questions, and I hope I will answer those for you today. So, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. You can see my screen. And I will begin the presentation. But first, I wanted to show you a video that is available on YouTube. I'm going to make this large screen just as soon as I start it.
I'll just stay. Instantly fell in love with him. He knew that I didn't have a dad. I didn't have a daddy. Used that in order. I didn't have a dad. I didn't have a daddy. Used that in order to gain control over my mind and eventually my actions, showing me that he loved me and giving me things that I had never had before. They move you away from your family. They move you away from anybody who could care for you or rescue you, or even see that perhaps you're in a bad situation. And they completely engage you in what's called the game or the life, so that things that would make other people's skin crawl turn out to be normal occurrences to you. And at that point, you are completely dominated by this person. You do belong to this person. I knew I was in a situation that I was not in control of. I knew I was in a situation where I was being exploited, where I was being beat, where I was being raped, where I was being tortured for the commercial gain of another human being. I was definitely not free. That is not a situation where one is free. The crux of my childhood growing up was that my parents didn't love me. The specifics include physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. My parents trafficking me and selling me for sex. The official trafficking began when I was 10. My parents had already terrified me, so I wasn't going to directly tell somebody, because if I got caught, then I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I remember in the 3rd grade, I wrote my teacher a letter, and I didn't say explicitly that they were abusing me, but I said, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th. And I wrote every grade out, and I said, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I remember she chuckled because I was this straight A student, and she was taking it as if I meant I'm not going to succeed or something.
I was 13 or 14. We went to his mother's house, and the two girls, the two older
the two women that he had with him in the car when he picked me up began to prep me for what was to come. The older girl, she kind of walked me through how it would go, what I was supposed to do with the money, when I was supposed to get the money, how much I was supposed to charge, and what to expect, and told me that I should have a lot of alcohol in me, that it may be hard, but that it would get easier, and I did that. I was shaped like a boy, very stringy, very thin, very underdeveloped. It flabbergasts me that it was okay. You know, that the people who were coming to buy us, the Johns, if you will, that they knew that I was a child.
Okay, I'm going to stop that here.
I
So, you've just heard the voice of sex trafficking survivors. And what you heard from them is that they start early, young, very young. And we need to be aware of this and know that there is impact on our community. So let's begin our presentation. We know in Indian country that violence against women is not traditional. And we say no to violence against women. That includes children. There's an organization named United Nations Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. That's actually United Nations is the agency, and this protocol is a document. It is a human rights document. And here is the very official definition of trafficking that is found across the world internationally and here in the United States. There are some elements that are very important to you as an advocate or a concerned parent or grandparent or family member, as a community person, as a leader, that you would need to be aware of. And it is very important that women and children are trafficked by a means of threat or use of force or coercion. It includes abduction, kidnapping, it includes fraud, it includes deception. It is the abuse of power or a position of vulnerability. It includes the giving or receiving of payments or benefits, all for the purpose of exploitation. And exploitation includes exploitation of prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor and services, slavery and or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. Now, this is a lot of words, and I thought we should break that down a little bit. So, across the world, across the nation, around the globe, people are being recruited, they're being transported, they're being transferred, they're being harbored, they're being given to others. And this is the very first step in a process called trafficking. The way they manage to do all that is to threaten people, use force or other forms of coercion. They kidnap them, take them against their will. They present a false picture, which is how you would explain fraud, of deception, lying to them, all for the purpose of exploitation. And here on the screen at the bottom, I have included the link to this human rights document where you will be able to get lots more information on the subject of trafficking. So we're transferring people, we're using threats or coercion of some sort for the purpose of exploitation. And what do we do? Any means. We use any means possible. If I'm a trafficker, I will use any means to gain power control over vulnerable people. I will use my power. I will manipulate and take advantage of the person's position of vulnerability. Um, I could suggest that I will give you a place to stay, but you have to go out tonight and have sex with some people that I know. So that's a giving, that's a bartering situation. And all of these uh, giving, receiving of payments or bartering, they benefit to get consent of the person who is vulnerable. So I use any means possible to convince this vulnerable person that what I have to offer them is for their own good. It's going to keep them out of the rain. It's going to get them food. It's going to keep them safe from worse violence. And that is what exploitation is the use of any means. I think we need to become aware that there are over 2 million women and girls trafficked each year. This does include boys and men. Let's talk about some myths and misconceptions. Generally speaking, if you're just having a conversation over coffee, you would say, oh, trafficking doesn't happen in the United States, because lots of people have a belief that it has to be people from other countries brought into the United States. So that is a myth. That is a total misconception. Trafficking victims must be kidnapped or restrained physically. While this does happen, it is not always there. People are restrained by threats of violence, threats to kill their family, and threats to hurt them. Okay, so trafficking requires an international or state or tribal border crossing. Trafficking does not include crossing borders. Doesn't have anything to do with trafficking. The trafficking part is when a human being is, by means of fraud or coercion, exploited for the benefit of the trafficker. It doesn't have anything to do with crossing a border. Now, very often we do find that people who are trafficked do cross borders, and that becomes important in any attempt to hold a trafficker accountable. And this last myth that we talk about is that if the vulnerable person or the victim consented prior to the exploitation, that it's not trafficking. This is not true. Very often, the vulnerable people who are trafficked are under 18. And here in the United States, we have federal laws, we have state laws that say people under the 18 are children and are not able to make decisions for themselves, such as this. And so coercing or forcing someone under the age of 18 to have sex with anyone or anything else is a crime against that child. And it is trafficking. These are very important, language meanings that we have to pay attention to. But these are the main 4 myths that most of the general population truly believe about trafficking. Let's talk about smuggling versus human trafficking. So, smuggling is a crime against a country's border. Smuggling is usually an illegal boarding crosser. In other words, someone is coming into a country without proper paperwork. And that, here in the United States, we have 2 international borders. On our northern border, we have Canada. On our southern border, we have Mexico. And very often people will cross those borders illegally without proper paperwork. So it can include just being transported. Whoever is driving the car or the vehicle that the vulnerable people are in from Mexico to US, providing transportation is smuggling. Now, it's really important to know that smuggling is often a gateway to trafficking. So now let's look at trafficking. Trafficking is a crime against a person. It involves forced acts, labor, sex acts, stealing a human being's organs, forcing them to work. In Washington state, there is a large immigrant population on the peninsula of Washington state that harvests falal, which comes out of the forests and is used by the florists across the world. You know, those broad, slick greens that are placed in your bouquets that you purchase from floral um, businesses. That's called falal, and that is a labor, a trafficking labor. So transportation can be an element of human trafficking, but it is not required. One a very important behavior and tactic used in human trafficking is to transport vulnerable people out of the areas they're familiar with in order to maintain control over them. Creating isolation and confusion helps maintain the trafficker's control over the vulnerable people. Smuggling debt can be used as a means of initial control. So if I say to someone in Mexico or Canada, say, get my car, I'll get you over to the United States. And now I've got you over in the United States, and I turn around to you and say, now you owe me $10,000. You have a debt that you owe me, and you have to pay me back, or I'm going to turn you into the police, you know. So that smuggling debt can be used as a means of initial control and is very effective in the process of trafficking. So in the United States, on the federal side, we have what is called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It was initially passed in our Congress in the year 2000, and since then has been authorized in 2003, 2005, and most recently in 2013. And the 2013 reauthorization of the TVPA is included in the Violence Against Women Act legislation. And the TVPA defines sex trafficking as the recruitment, the harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act is under 18 years of age. Remember, we all know that children cannot make this decision to say, oh, yeah, I want to participate in sex acts or become a prostitute. That's my choice if I'm under 18. And this is the United States Constitution location of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, most commonly referred to as TVPA. And if you love acronyms like I do, and after working in anti-violence work for over 20 years, we have so many acronyms. So I often use acronyms and I've come to enjoy them. So in the TVPA, they have Title 12 and This is what is included. These are different subtitles and sections, and that will give further definition and meaning to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And so it's your definition, and it's about best practices in eliminating minimum standards for eliminating, ending trafficking, protection for domestic workers and other non-immigrants. And child marriage and child soldiers are also included in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So I mentioned that it was reauthorized in 2013 in the Violence Against Women Act legislation, and we call that VAWA 2013. So the pertinent language in VAWA 2013 relating to sex trafficking is here on the screen. It carries the same definition. It adds sex trafficking when it hadn't been in VAWA legislation prior to 2013. Before, it included domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. And so now sex trafficking is the fifth issue included in legislation for VAWA 2013. And this last point made that VAWA 2013 clarifies that any victim services and legal assistance provided to victims of human trafficking as part of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking is approved. So there are many different organizations that maybe work on one of those specific issues. Maybe it is a specific domestic violence agency. But now, if someone comes to them and has experienced domestic violence in the process of being trafficked, they can receive services and assistance. And that is a wonderful inclusion and benefit for, because there are so many, there's a lack of services for people who have been trafficked. And allowing these other agencies already working on violence is a great step forward. You know, we have to know that children just don't wake up one morning and say, hey, I'm going to be a prostitute. They're forced into it. They feel they have no other choice. I mean, let's think about this. At the age of 8, when you were thinking, or 10, or maybe even 12, when you were thinking about what you wanted to be when you grew up, was prostitute on that list? I don't think so. Children are coerced into trafficking. And we're going to talk now about identifying at-risk persons. And I've been talking about children, people under the age of 18, which is here in the United States is the majority age. So in order to identify vulnerable people, we as community people really need to look beneath the surface in all situations we encounter and be vigilant for potential instances of human trafficking. We need to learn the indicators of human trafficking and what are the red flags. This is a key step in identifying victims of trafficking. Here's another acronym I'm sharing with you. It's CSEC, and that stands for Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. And if you are in the field that works on eliminating, preventing, eradicating trafficking, you will hear CSEC commonly. That's a very common term. There's another one I forgot to put up there, and the acronym is DMST. That stands for Domestic Minors in Sex Trafficking. DMST. So that refers to all children in the United States with United States citizenship. We also need to become familiar with language. If you talk to children and you are thinking they may be connected to a trafficker, they're not going to identify that trafficker as a pimp or as an abuser. They're going to say, that person is my daddy. That person is my boyfriend. That person is taking care of me. So be watchful and listening and looking for the language. There's another term that's very popular with teenagers, uh, specifically teenagers who have been labeled as runaways, and that is a term called survival sex. This describes the exchange of sex for money or other considerations, such as food, shelter, transportation, or safety. People who are participating, they believe at their own will, by their own permission, think of themselves not as prostitutes. They do not think of themselves as being involved in the sex trade. What they are doing is only what they have to do to survive. So if someone says to you, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm only doing what I have to do to survive, that can be a cue for you. So that's, kind of one of those languages that we need to become familiar with. Also, we would ask people to use the term sex trade to describe the business aspect of commercial sexual exploitation, or all transaction in which sexual activity is exchanged for food, shelter, drugs, transportation, approval, money, or safety. It is the sex trade. People may identify more with that versus saying, I'm a prostitute. Again, language is so important. And there's basically two models that traffickers will use to coerce vulnerable people into trafficking. The first one is called finesse pimping, and it's very similar to a domestic violence honey. Let's see. It's the period of time in sexual assault and rape and all sexual violence advocacy that's called the grooming period. In domestic violence, is probably more like what they call the honeymoon period, or both of them should really be called manipulation periods, because finesse pimping involves making promises, saying things like, I love you, I care for you, no one else does. Don't believe them. They only want to take from you, and I don't want anything from you but to love you. I will take care of you. You need clothes? Here's clothes. Do you want to go watch a movie? Let's go watch a movie. Whatever it is that's going to make the vulnerable person believe they're being loved and cared for. That is finesse pimping. And in finesse pimping, it starts out that way until it comes to a point where the trafficker finally says, oh, gosh, gee, I've used all of our money and I don't know what we're going to do to live on. And I know a really quick way we could get some money. Why don't you? I know a place where you can dance and you can get a lot of tips. And you're so pretty and you're so beautiful. And people will give you a lot of money just to watch you dance. Or, you can go out on this corner of a street and you can do this and you will get money. And that's how you can pay me back for all this time of taking care of you and loving you and being there for you. So the other type of pimping is sometimes referred to as guerrilla pimping. And what that refers to is often the tactic used by gangs, or what people might call mobs, people who are involved in many and multiple illicit crimes, that this is just one of their endeavors. And guerrilla pimping is hanging out at the Greyhound bus station, looking for younger people who are looking scared, confused. There's no one waiting to pick them up. And they will go over there and make friends and say, hey, I can help you out, yada, yada, yada. Let's go do this together. And the next thing we know, people are coerced into dancing and the sex trade. And dancing is huge, a huge aspect of the sex trade. And the younger they are, the more desirable they are. And that is a very sad and traumatic, uh, violent experience for anyone. So let's talk more about recognizing the signs. Let's think about the common work and living conditions of someone who may be involved against their will in the sex trade. Can we find out if the person you're talking to you is not free to leave, or they cannot come and go? If they say, I have to ask my daddy, that's a clue. If they are under 18 and you know they're providing sex acts for money or trade or drugs, then that's a sign that they may be trafficked. If you know that they have a pimp or a manager, they might call him a manager. If the vulnerable person you're working with says, yeah, I have a manager and my manager, takes good care of me. If you can ask them how they earn their money, if they're paid through tips, which might be dancing, or paid very little because the manager, the pimp, or the trafficker gets all of the money. And also, what hours do they work? Do they work long hours? Do they work unusual hours? Now, in the United States, the most common work hours are during the day. Um, yes, we do have many careers and trades that would require someone to work from, say, 3 p.m. to midnight, and some various trades and skills that are required to work overnight. But if someone has to work from 5 p.m. till 3 in the morning, and those are excessively long hours, and if they are under the age of 18, you might think to yourself, that's probably against the law. Number one, well, children can't work those hours, and it's also against federal Fair Labor and Standards Act. So, again, put your thinking cap on and listen to what the person is telling you. Here's some other common work and living conditions. What if they don't get to take a break, or they have unusual restrictions, like they say have to stand for really long hours or have to walk, really far. If they mention they have a large debt and they feel like they can't pay it off. What if they mentioned someone said that I could come here and get a really great paying job and I couldn't, and so now I'm doing this work in the sex trade? What about if the place where they say they live or they work has really high security measures? Like you can't see through the windows. Maybe there's a business name on the front, but there's no way to call or contact. It's locked up. There's someone always watching the door. Look for bars on the windows. Look for a lot of security cameras. Is there barbed wire fence around the property? These are things that could give you a clue that someone is involved in the sex trade, and most usually against their will. Also, things, maybe you work in the social or health field, and what you're noticing is the vulnerable person you're talking to has poor mental health, or maybe some, well, it says here abnormal, but less than positive behavior. It could also be Is the person fearful, anxious, depressed, tense, nervous, paranoid, extremely submissive, not talkative? Are they extremely fearful when law enforcement is nearby or bringing up law enforcement? What if they totally avoid eye contact? What if they won't speak to you? These are things. Physical health, if it's bad, if they're constantly coming to your clinic, and they have bruises that might indicate they've been restrained, such as around both wrists or around their ankles, or burns, excessive bruising that looks like handprints, um, unexplained injuries, or the explanation they give for the injury doesn't match the patterning of the injury. What if they're malnourished? They're extremely thin. They're starving. Look for any signs that you would think would indicate physical or sexual abuse, restraint, confinement, or torture. And really put your thinking cap on. Definitely, we want to look for things that are indicating they have no control over anything, such as they have few or no personal possessions. Um, they don't have control over their money, or they have no bank account or no financial records. Maybe they don't even have any ID, or someone else is in control of their identification. What if they know they can't speak for themselves, or there's a third party that insists on being present and translating? You may notice that a lot of these signs that we're talking about are very similar to signs, red flags, warnings that we look for in people who are experiencing domestic violence, sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking. They're very similar. So you have to be very aware and be paying attention to the the extremity of each of these. The the way off on a far end of the continuum for someone specifically who's under the age of 18. What if they say they're just visiting and they don't know where they're staying? What if they can't identify the people they're staying with? What if they really don't know what the name of the city they're in? What if they have a loss of the sense of time? They don't know what time it is because mostly all they do is sleep or work. So they may truly have lost that sense of time. So there are some statistics. Statistics are wonderful in painting a visual picture without having a picture. And so we're going to give you some statistics on domestic sex trafficking. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, their acronym is NCMEC, suggests that between 100,000 to almost 300,000 children are in danger of becoming sexual commodities. The U.S. Department of Justice reports that 12 is the average age of entry into pornography and prostitution in the United States. Who do you know in your family and in your circle that's 12? Would you want them to be coerced into the sex trade? Another national organization named Shared Hope International suggests that 8 of the 112 minors trafficked out of state into Nevada for prostitution were from Washington state. This is a huge practice in the trafficking industry, to take vulnerable people out of their community. And if you think about it, I mentioned we have two international borders, Mexico and Canada. And the United States, here especially on the West Coast, We have roads that go from start in Mexico and go all the way through Canada, such as Interstate 5. There's also, before we had Interstate 5, we had Highway 97 and Highway 99. And if you look at those older roads, Highway 97 is kind of up through central Oregon and Washington. Interstate 5 is closer to the higher populated western coast, and there are a lot of ports with, a lot of towns and cities that have water access. So people can come and go, can be slipped in and out very easily and can cross a state boundary. And if someone is young, under the 18, they may not know where they're being taken. They may not know that they just crossed a state boundary and they won't know where they're at. And so it can be very difficult for them to reach out and ask for help from anyone that they might consider a support person or a support system from their home areas. Domestic sex trafficking. Victims are American children, youth of all races and all different backgrounds. But what we know working in Indian country is that Native children are very vulnerable, and there is a higher likelihood that they will be coerced into the sex trade at a disproportionately high rate when compared to African Americans, different Asian ethnicities, Latin ethnicities. So, and they range in age from infants to teens. This is the hard part, right? Hearing these statistics. Who do you know in your family in that age range from infants to teens? Is it possible they could be involved in trafficking? Wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to do anything you could to prevent and protect those people, those young people? 12 is the average age, but what traffickers and pimps and managers do is tell them you need to say you're over 18, because if you say you're over 18 and you don't have any ID on you, then they have to believe you. But if you say you're under 18, then that will be a bigger crime, a larger crime with more severe penalties. And so often they like young people who can, with makeup and enhancement, can look older, but still have the innocence of being a child. That is very attractive to pornographers and people who buy and sell human beings. 1 out of 5 pornographic images is of a child. This is astounding. Child pornography is a $3 billion business. And I can't believe there's over 100,000 websites that offer child pornography. I can't believe it, but I do believe it because I work in this field. I do believe it. And 55% of internet child pornography comes from the United States. We have to open our eyes. We have to open our minds and not be in denial. This is happening with people we know, 2 people we know. People we know are perpetrators of it. We have got to get our heads out of the sand and quit saying this happens elsewhere. It happens in your community, in your hometown. I can promise you. If you have a mall, it can happen there. I promise you. Do not be blinded. So, we talked about the sex trade, which is the business side of trafficking. What do you think of these numbers? It's atrocious, absolutely atrocious. And this was a source that had a report in 2005. We are now in 2013, so this is 8 years old. 32 billion total yearly profits generated. Probably in 8 years, that's probably doubled. I don't know. The majority of the money comes from industrialized countries such as the United States, France, Britain, China, Japan, people that claim to have a higher moral standing and claim to be so educated and so forward thinking and so caring and so wonderful that we would take care of our children and our vulnerable people. The majority of the money is made in these countries, like ours. It's astonishing. It's out of control, and we really need to face it and do something about it. A woman who is trafficked for sex is worth about $400,000 per year. Is it no wonder traffickers do not want to lose their precious commodity? That they will threaten, they will coerce, they will torture, they will restrict, they will hold people in captivity until they age out of their, young, the age range that's so attractive to pornographers and buyers of sex. $400,000 a year, and that woman never sees a penny of that in cash in their hand. Never. And if you make $400,000 per year, don't you think that would pay off a $10,000 smuggling debt? No. If someone who is trafficked tries to leave, they're often brutalized to teach them a lesson. And then if they're trafficked from outside, well, no, even if they're trafficked in the United States, the trafficker says, I know where you came from. I know who your family is. I'm going to kill them. I'm going to make your family pay your debt. You tried to escape. I'm going to double your debt now. Oh, you want to leave? You owe me 10,000. If you want to leave, you have to save up money and pay me $50,000, and then you can leave. These are ways people are trapped and coerced. The price of a sexual act is often equal to that of one use of crack or meth. In other words, this is very affordable. And human sex trafficking is the third largest industry in the world. Wow. So there was a new trafficking in persons report that came out in 2011. And says the United States is definitely a source involved in the transit of and a destination country for men, women, and children subject to forced labor, debt bondage, document servitude, and sex trafficking. And trafficking occurs in the following ways: street prostitution, massage parlors, brothels. Did I mention dancing? For labor in domestic service, such as being a nanny or a housekeeper. It occurs in agriculture. Here in Washington State, the whole east side of our state is involved in agriculture, and every end of summer, every summer and fall season, we need large numbers of people to harvest the food. Prime in area for people to be trafficked for labor. Manufacturing, janitorial services, hotel services, hospitality industries, construction, health and elder care, and strip club dancing. U.S. child citizen victims are often viewed as runaways, as troubled, and as homeless youth. Instead of when we hear the word, oh, this 12-year-old is missing, oh, well, they're a runaway. Oh, well, they're a bad kid. Let's just write them off. No, instead we should be thinking, where are they and who has them? Who is coercing them into the sex trade? That's what we should be thinking. So here's some statistics about law enforcement charges and convictions. These numbers are very small when you think of sex trafficking as the third largest industry across the globe. In the last decade, 18 states have initiated their own trafficking laws and task forces and services for people who have been trafficked, and are able to arrest, charge, and convict, and then imprison them. This is good, but 18 out of 50 is not enough. Fortunately for us, Washington State is one of those 18 states. Shared Hope International has done what they call a grading system where they will do analysis on all the states regarding their laws and their services and their law enforcement system, their judicial system, and all the systems, and then come to grade each state. And Shared Hope International just released Washington State's rating, which was an A rating. So that means Washington State is doing a lot of groundbreaking work, which we can be proud of. But we need that work to include Indian country. We want to keep our children safe, the Native children safe from trafficking. And we need to incorporate response to human trafficking within our tribal nations and our sovereign um, peoples. We need to. Okay, less than 10% of state and local law enforcement had protocols or policy on human trafficking. Does your community, does your tribal nation have codes for this? Is law enforcement trained in it? Is there a way for you to work in it? How would you work with the FBI? Because the trafficking cases would most often arise to the level of felonies. How are we working with the feds on these things? And how can we protect our valuable children? Does vulnerability matter? I say yes. Because what I've been trying to impress upon you is the vulnerable people are the ones who get exploited, who get coerced, who get kidnapped, who get forced into all types of demeaning activity, illegal activity, that not one of them ever said, when I grow older, I want to do this. And if they are of a majority age, it's not on their bucket list to do before they die. I promise you. So let's look at these contributing factors. Foster care, runaway youth, abandoned children, children living in homes of extreme poverty with hunger and homelessness as a concern, children who witness and experience violence in their home, including domestic violence and drug and alcohol use, and child sexual abuse, things that are happening directly to our children in their homes, child abuse and neglect and incest. Children who experience any of these or have any of these factors are vulnerable. They're in danger of being trafficked. We have a responsibility, right? Some next steps. I'm talking very passionately about this because I feel very passionate about it. I have grandchildren. I do not want them to have to experience anything close to this. It is very important for us to do our best to protect our children across the globe, but definitely within our families, within our towns and our cities and our reservations. So here are some next steps. And today is a step, right? We're taking a step today. we're getting knowledge of the issue. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. We need to identify vulnerable people that live near us. We need to develop a response with an emphasis on healing and empowerment, definitely specifically based on Native customs and traditions. We have to prioritize the healing within tribes and nations. Anyone under 18 that is involved in the sex trade or any type of trafficking is a victim of a crime, not a criminal. We have to ensure that our young people are not re-victimized as a result of information in a report of being trafficked. And definitely, even though the most people who are trafficked are female biologically, this is not solely a woman's issue. We need to include men and boys and two-spirit in the solutions. If any of us living in our neighborhoods, in our families, living near to us, have any of those vulnerability factors that we talked about, they are in danger of being coerced into trafficking. I can't say that enough. So let's talk just a little bit here about some resources, because there are some resources. We have a national hotline for trafficking. You can call them to report a tip, to connect with anti-trafficking services in your area, or request training and technical assistance, general information, or specific anti-trafficking resources. Here is their number: 888-3737-888. And yes, that is formatted differently, but it's formatted in a way that would be easy for someone to remember if they were to see it in a bathroom or on a poster or on a matchbook or in a clinic, that they would be able to remember that number fairly easy. So the national hotline is organized by the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. This is available 24 hours a day to answer calls from anywhere in the country, 7 days a week. And the Resource Center is underneath the umbrella of Polaris Project. And Polaris Project is across the United States and in China, in Japan. They are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization working solely, exclusively on the issue of trafficking. They are not government, they are not law enforcement, and they're not an immigration authority, but a very valuable resource. So make sure you write that down and keep that in your notes for resources. When we were talking about statistics, I mentioned the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Very valuable resource, because very often how we learn about trafficking is a child is missing. Here in Washington State, we have children that go missing all the time. And this is a very valuable resource. If you don't have any idea what could have happened to them, this is an excellent resource for you. Here's their webpage, and here is their hotline. You can also use this hotline to report a tip if you think you see someone who's been kidnapped or taken or is being exploited. Excellent, excellent resource for us. Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. Nicole Matthews is the executive director, and that is their website. Her organization actually participated in a research study, and they named their report The Garden of Truth: The Prostitution and Trafficking of Native Women in Minnesota. Underneath it is a link to that report. Please go there and view it, read it, and get her information. It's very important. I've also, Nicole has graciously done some webinars, and one of them is recorded on the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center website in their webinars, and it's archived. And that is a link to her webinar that she did with them. Again, there's also additional information about trafficking in Indian country, and you will want to check that out as well. These are both free and easy to access. You can access them anytime thanks to the internet. So there is really no reason why any of us cannot have some good information about sex trafficking and the beginnings of information on sex trafficking, specifically in Indian country. But here at Women's Spirit Coalition, we definitely want to start the conversation for Indian country in Washington state. Here are some other web resources. Our Washington State Attorney General on Human Trafficking, they have a website. Lots of information for you there specific to Washington State. Go there, check it out. There is an organization called Prostitution Research and Education. There's the Aboriginal Women's Action Network. The Coalition Against Trafficking in Women is the first organization on trafficking in women in the United States. And they have been around for a long time and they are still doing the work. So they are an excellent resource for us on trafficking. And of course, you can go to Polaris Project directly. Gabriella Network, there's the connection for that. Sage, um, Breaking Free. Andrea Dworkin Online Library has quite a bit of information on prostitution, pornography, and sex trafficking. And strip clubs, according to strippers, it's an article that you can download and read. So that would be a good resource as well. I'm not done yet. I want you to know that Polaris Project has free materials for outreach and awareness that you can download. You can get them directly off their website, or you can also go to, I think you can order some printed materials and they'll mail them to you. So there is the website for that. And the second bullet is the government program in anti-trafficking. And their campaign is actually called Look Beyond the Surface. And they offer you free materials, and they definitely will mail them to you. In Madison, Wisconsin, there's Project Respect. In Minnesota, there's several different options for you for resources. And I wanted to make sure you knew about GEMS, which stands for Girls Empowerment Mentoring Services, and that's out of New York City. And that is for under 18 girls who have been trafficked. They offer a day program, which has been an exceptionally good model. And it's their director is Rachel Lloyd, who herself is a survivor of trafficking. She immigrated from Britain, and she is a dynamo, and they have garnered a lot of success and attention. So definitely check out GEMS as a resource. The SAGE Project in San Francisco, they work directly with all people who are trafficked. And CAST Los Angeles, same thing. Great resources, excellent websites to check out for more information. To bring to our next conversation on trafficking in Indian country, Washington state, because this will be an ongoing conversation. I want to thank you for joining me for this webinar. I hope we've provided some words and ideas for thought and action, really for action. I hope we can start taking some action. Women's Spirit Coalition is proud to offer this to you free of charge. Our office is located in Olympia, Washington. There is our phone number and our website. And you can also follow us on Facebook. That is our social media site. And we envision a world where Native women live safely. And that means without coercion into the sex trade. Thank you and good evening.